I asked for 4 days. That's all. 4 days to bury the man who raised me. I didn't ask for a month-long sabbatical, didn't threaten to walk out or make a spectacle. I simply stood in the glass box they called her office and said the words with more calm than I felt. I need 4 days to bury my father. And Rena, my wife, CEO of Ridgetech and self-proclaimed visionary, didn't blink. She didn't lean forward, didn't ask how I was doing. She crossed her arms, let out a small, deliberate sigh, and tilted her head just enough to make it feel like I just proposed something foolish. You'll need to choose between work and your family, she said, her voice razor-sharp and sterile. There wasn't even a flicker of empathy in her tone. Just business. Just numbers. Just timing. I stood there like a man suddenly unplugged from something I couldn't name. Her words floated in the air, lingering like the chill you feel when someone slams the door to a warm room behind them. I watched her lips stop moving, her arms remaining crossed like punctuation on a sentence she thought didn't need discussion. I waited for a second. Maybe she'd soften. Maybe there was still a sliver of humanity left underneath all that strategic polish and shareholder poise. But she turned her eyes back to her screen, typing something like I hadn't just told her my father died yesterday. The Willcrest integration is in final negotiation, she added, her tone now clipped, more annoyed than stern. You're the only one who knows the full system architecture. There it was, the trump card. She didn't say, I'm sorry. She didn't say, take the time you need. No, she framed it like I had leverage I shouldn't use. Because to her, I wasn't grieving. I was being inconvenient. So I nodded. Not because I agreed. Not because I gave in. I nodded because that's what you do when you realize the person across from you is no longer your partner. They're just a mirror of your sacrifices, reflecting nothing back. I didn't trust myself to speak. I didn't want to cry, not in front of her. That wasn't the kind of audience you shed real grief in front of. So I turned, kept my spine straight, and walked out of that office like I still had something to believe in. Every step back to my own office felt heavier than the last. Ridgetech had floor-to-ceiling glass walls and minimalist furniture, like being inside a sleek, modern fishbowl. Everyone could see everyone. No secrets. But that day, I felt like the only real person in the building. I closed my door, turned off the lights, and just sat in my chair for a while. My father's voice echoed in my head. Not loud, not commanding, just calm like he always was when life kicked the breath out of me. Take a breath, Jared, then choose. He taught me that when I was a teenager and someone at school carved the word nerd into my locker. He said, you can't control other people's cruelty, but you can choose how to answer it. That voice, that memory, that man. I was being told he didn't deserve 4 days. My hand hovered over the keyboard, aimless. I stared at the lines of code on my screen, thousands of lines I'd written, improved, fixed in the dark while others slept. I thought about the hours I'd spent building RidgeNet's backend because Rena insisted we couldn't afford a real team. I thought about the sleep I lost, the dinners I missed, the apologies I whispered to my father when I had to cancel a visit again and again because the company needs me. And now the company, my wife, couldn't spare me for 4 days. There was a numbness in my chest, like grief had hardened into something brittle and sharp. I pressed the heels of my palms against my eyes and waited for the tears to come, but they didn't. Instead, I felt the quiet rush of clarity, the kind you get when someone draws a line so clearly in the sand, you finally know which side to stand on. I stood up and looked around my office, sterile, spotless, professional. The kind of place people looked at and assumed I had everything. Title: Lead Systems Architect. Salary: high 6 figures. Respect: minimal. Control: none. I opened my drawer and pulled out the photo I kept hidden beneath my documents. It was the two of us, Dad and me, at my college graduation. He was beaming, his hand on my shoulder like he was anchoring me to something solid. I had no mother, no siblings, just him. He didn't raise me to be spineless. He didn't sacrifice everything for me to be silenced. I ran my fingers over the frame, then placed it upright on the desk for the first time in months. And in that moment, I decided, not loudly, not rashly, but with the kind of still certainty that doesn't beg for approval. I turned my monitor off, logged out, and slipped the office keycard into my coat pocket. I walked out of the building without saying a word, past the junior engineers who still thought I had power, past the HR manager who always looked away when I entered the break room, past the receptionist who chirped, "Have a good one," without even looking up. Outside, the sky had started to dim. The air was cooler than it looked, and the hum of the city sounded different. For the first time in years, I realized I was alone, not in the sense of being without people, but in the sense of being surrounded by the wrong ones. And I had 4 days. Not to rest. Not to grieve, at least not the way Rena thought. But to remember the man who taught me how to fight without fists. And to sharpen the silence in my chest into something useful. Because this story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The house was too quiet without him. Even after all these years, after I'd moved to the city and become someone with a title and a salary that people clapped for at conferences, Dad's house still felt like the only place that understood me. The screen door creaked the same way it did when I was 12. The living room still smelled faintly of cedar and old books. And the coffee table, scratched and stained, still bore the mark of every science fair project, every math competition trophy he helped me build my confidence for. This was where he cheered the loudest, where he poured every ounce of himself into raising me alone after cancer took Mom. I didn't cry that night, not because I wasn't hurting, but because something colder than grief had started to settle inside me. Not rage. Not yet. Just an unbearable weight of clarity. I sat down in Dad's old office chair, the one with the torn leather and the armrest that wobbled when you leaned too far. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as my laptop booted up. The blue glow of the login screen reflected off the dusty glass of the bookshelf beside me. Books on algorithms, data structures, quantum computing. Most were Dad's, annotated in his tight handwriting. Others were mine, gifts from him, passed along with pride and soft encouragement. "You'll get it, Jay," he'd always say. "You just need one more look." I used to believe that I just needed one more look, one more chance, one more conversation to explain myself. But I was done explaining, done asking people like Rena to see me, done waiting for respect to be offered. It was time I stopped offering myself to those who only took. So I opened the Willcrest Systems directory. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't cue up music or slam a drink beside me like I was in some tech thriller revenge movie. I just exhaled slowly, cracked my knuckles, and started backing up every proprietary file tied to RidgeNet, the infrastructure I had built silently, line by line, year after year, with zero formal budget, zero thanks, and zero acknowledgement. They didn't even know what it cost. The weekends, the holidays, the missed birthdays with Dad when I was just one line of code away from solving it. And every time I'd call to say I couldn't make it, he'd just say, "I understand, son. You're building something big." God, he thought I was building something that mattered. But what I built, it mattered only as long as they could use it. The minute I asked for something human, time to bury the man who taught me everything, I became expendable. I wasn't going to cry about that anymore. I was going to answer it. I created a secure partition in my private cloud server. Encrypted. Multi-factor gated. Redundant backups. Isolated logs. The kind of setup no one could stumble into, no matter how good the IT director thought she was. I transferred every script, every subsystem, every bridge protocol that connected Willcrest's integration stack to our main RidgeNet environment. The whole thing lived on my terms now. They had a skeleton. The shell. The dummy architecture for demos and investor slides. But the real body, the one that made RidgeTech's most valuable project function, was now in my hands. And I had no intention of giving it back. The backup took hours. So I sat there, surrounded by the hum of quiet fans and the faint tick of Dad's old wall clock, thinking about how far we'd come. He used to pick me up from school in a rusted-out Toyota with missing hubcaps, always waving from the driver's seat like I was returning from war. He never missed a science fair. Not one. Not the one where I blew a fuse and blacked out half the auditorium. Not the one where I coded a basic encryption model and the judge said, "Too advanced, must have been done by a parent." Dad just smiled and said, "Well, I am his parent." And no, I didn't help. When I told him I wanted to start RidgeNet with Rena, he said, "Just be sure the person you're building with sees you, even when the lights are off." I laughed at the time. Said, "She's brilliant, Dad. She's like me, just more polished." He nodded, but he didn't smile. I should have paid more attention to that. By 3:47 a.m., the final packet confirmed transfer. I shut the lid of my laptop and sat in the dark. There was no applause. No justice horn sounding in the distance. Just me, and the realization that I didn't owe them anything anymore. Not Rena, not RidgeTech, not the board, not Marcus, who always smiled too wide but never looked me in the eye when credit was passed around the table. And especially not JC, the IT director who once asked if I needed help translating my code into something real. They didn't know who I was. And they never cared to. Dad did. He deserved more than silence. I stood and walked through the hallway toward my old room. It hadn't changed much. Faded posters of early tech visionaries, Turing, Jobs, Hopper, still lined the wall. My first laptop was still on the desk. A dinosaur of a machine, but it still worked. He kept it clean, preserved. Like he was waiting for me to come back and remember who I was. So I did. I sat down, flipped the screen open, and booted up the terminal. A soft command line prompt blinked. I didn't need to type anything right then. I just stared at it, that small blinking cursor reminding me I still had agency. That in a world full of people who would pretend you were nothing once they'd taken everything, there was still power in what you choose to do next. I took a picture of Dad's pendant. The one he carved himself from pine and kept on his keychain until he died, and set it as my desktop background. A reminder, a quiet vow. Then I wrote my resignation email. Plain, formal, cold, just like Rena liked things. But in that silence, behind that calm, was everything I'd built, and everything they had just lost. They called it RidgeNet, like it was born from the ether, like it just happened. But RidgeNet didn't come from thin air. It came from my sleepless nights, my cluttered notebooks, my calloused fingers dancing across a keyboard in the kind of rhythm that only desperation can teach. Rena branded it, pitched it, slid it into every investor deck with a confidence that made people believe it was a team effort. But RidgeNet was mine. Every line of code, every integration protocol, every bridge workaround that kept their fragile system duct taped together. And all of it, every last bit, lived in my head. She didn't want to pay real developers. Said it would bloat the budget. Said I was the secret weapon. I smiled back then. I thought being called that meant something. I thought she saw me. But now I know she just saw utility. I was the discount genius with a wedding ring and no ego. The in-house miracle. The cheap fix. And cheap fixes don't get 4 days to bury their fathers. Cheap fixes get ultimatums. So that night, after backing up everything, I went to the real heart of RidgeNet. The undocumented parts. The real backbone of Wilcrest's $3.8 million integration. Rena thought I had it all mapped. But that was a lie we both let live. What she didn't know, and what I never told anyone, was that the demo-ready version was a fragile illusion. It wasn't fake. It just wasn't sustainable. It couldn't scale. It couldn't breathe without the secret layers I'd built in my private time. The code I never logged in the official repo. The internal dependencies and deadlock bypasses that made everything look smoother than it really was. And without those, the whole thing would collapse. My fingers flew across the keys. I built RidgeNet like an architect builds a cathedral, layered, precise, elegant where no one could see it. I didn't just write code. I shaped behavior. I anticipated user drift, back-end surges, traffic surges from partner systems. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't glamorous. But it was bulletproof. And none of them, not Rena, not Marcus, not even JC, had the first clue how deep it went. I moved every undocumented file, every secret integration bridge, to a private server that sat behind 3 layers of encryption. Not some offshore sketch operation. No, this was clean, professional, legal. I wasn't sabotaging them. I was reclaiming what I built. What was mine? The contract never said RidgeNet was company property. In fact, it was always classified as a transitional infrastructure tool pending formal acquisition, which, in Rena's brilliance, she'd never bothered to lock down. She thought marriage was the contract. That being my wife gave her the keys to my mind. But I'd never signed that part over. It was surreal, pulling it all out. Like removing the skeleton from a standing man and watching him keep smiling, unaware he's already dead. The shell was still there. The demo version. The nice UI overlays and dummy data. They could still walk through it, show investors some clickable prototypes. But once they tried to plug in Wilcrest's actual load and live data, it would snap. Quietly. Fatally. By 3 a.m., I was done. Everything that mattered was in my cloud repository, segmented by modules, tagged for future deployment. I even left behind a few benign breadcrumbs, outdated documents, placeholder APIs, to make it look like the system was still intact. It wasn't cruelty. It was art. A silent, elegant retreat. The kind that only someone truly tired of being invisible knows how to execute. I sat back in Dad's chair. The wood creaked beneath me. My eyes burned from the glow of the screen. But I wasn't exhausted. I was clear, focused. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a man fading behind a desk. I felt like a man reclaiming his name. And then, with a calm I couldn't fake, I drafted my resignation. No flourishes, no emotions, just fact. Effective immediately, I am resigning from my role as lead systems architect at Ridge Tech, LLC. I wish the company well in all future endeavors. I didn't CC anyone. I didn't attach documentation. I didn't explain. I had sinned. The quiet afterward was perfect. No pings. No follow-ups. Just a soft, message-sent notification and the digital sound of a door closing. For a moment, I didn't move. I just sat there and let the silence hold me. It wasn't grief. It wasn't relief. It was something deeper. A shift. Like I'd finally stepped out of a skin that no longer fit. I remembered every dinner where Rena scrolled through her phone while I told her about a breakthrough. Every boardroom meeting where Marcus pitched my architecture as a collaborative team design. Every time JC pretended I didn't exist unless something broke. And every single moment I stayed silent, thinking loyalty would eventually be returned. They didn't deserve RidgeNet. Not anymore. And they sure as hell didn't deserve me. I stood up, stretched, and cracked my neck. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. But food could wait. Sleep could wait. The only thing I wanted in that moment was to drive. To be gone. To be somewhere that didn't smell like fluorescent lights and glass doors. I grabbed my jacket, my laptop, and the USB drive that held the final verification logs. I walked out the front door into the crisp night air and looked up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, I could see them clearly. No high-rise towers. No pollution. Just sky. I got in the rental car and set the GPS to the one place that still felt like home. And as I pulled away from the house, Dad's house, now mine, I didn't look back at the laptop bag. Because the $3.8 million they thought they owned? It was sitting right beside me. And they hadn't even noticed it was gone yet. The first call came in at 5:12 a.m. I was halfway through the second hour of my drive, eyes fixed on the stretch of two-lane highway cutting through hills and farmland. I let it ring. I didn't even glance at the screen. The silence was too precious. Too earned. Somewhere between the neon glare of Ridge Tech's office towers and the quiet countryside rising ahead of me, something in me had shifted. I'd stopped feeling like a man on the edge. I'd stepped off. And the fall? It felt like freedom. The second call came minutes later. Then the third. By the fourth, I pulled over just long enough to switch my phone to Do Not Disturb, then tossed it into the passenger seat without ceremony. I wasn't ready to listen to them scramble. Not yet. They didn't deserve my ears. Not after what they said. Not after what they did. But by the time I reached the outskirts of Mayfield, the town where my father raised me, the town where everything about me began, I couldn't resist. The car idled in front of an old bakery that used to give us free rolls on Sundays, the air tinged with the scent of rising dough and warm cinnamon. I picked up the phone and checked the log. 17 missed calls. 5 from Rena. Her name still came up as Rena, home, on my screen. The irony made me chuckle. That word had stopped applying a long time ago. 9 from Marcus, the ever-loyal second-in-command who acted like Ridge Tech was a kingdom and Rena was queen. He never quite knew where I fit. Sometimes he'd act like I was a founding genius. Most days, I was just an overpaid coder taking up floor space. 3 from JC, the IT director who once told me, "No offense, Jared, but you need to learn how to delegate." The same JC who now couldn't find the system she thought she controlled. I scrolled through the voicemails, but didn't hit play. The transcripts told me everything. "Jared, we can't locate the Willcrest configuration protocols. They're just gone. There's no backup schema. Did you move something? Please, call us. This isn't okay." Each message dripped with urgency, but not regret, not apology, just panic, coded in entitlement. Like I owed them an explanation for walking away. Like I was supposed to play savior one more time. I turned off the screen and looked out over the small town square of Mayfield. A few shops had changed. The hardware store was gone. But the old barber shop still had that red and white pole spinning slow as molasses. Dad used to sit me in that second chair and talk philosophy with the barber while I got my hair trimmed. "Be kind," he'd always say. "But don't confuse kindness for weakness." Rena confused a lot of things. Love with control, loyalty with silence, vision with vanity. And now she'd have to live with the result. I drove past the school where Dad taught math for 35 years. Past the library where he'd read aloud during summer programs. Past the diner where we'd sit in the back booth and split peach pie every time I came home from college. The memories were layered into every corner of this town. Not flashy, not loud. Just steady, like him. I pulled up to his house, our house, and parked under the maple tree out front. The leaves rustled like they remembered me. The screen door creaked the same way it did when I was a teenager sneaking in after curfew. Inside, everything was exactly as I left it 2 days earlier. Simple, clean, familiar. I carried my bag inside and went straight to the den, dropped into his recliner, and finally listened to the voicemails. Jared, please, call me. We can work something out, Rena said in the fifth message. Her voice didn't crack. Not yet. She was still in CEO mode. Still trying to control the optics. We're dead in the water without your documentation. Marcus hissed in his latest recording. You're being irrational. And then, from JC. If you're holding the systems hostage, we'll escalate this legally. You signed employment contracts. I leaned back and laughed. A full, rich laugh that surprised even me. They thought I was bluffing. They thought I was impulsive, emotional. They had no idea how long I'd been preparing for this. Then the seventh voicemail played. It was Rena again. Softer this time. I overreacted. Please. Let's talk. Just send the files. We can fix this. Fix? No. There was no fixing something that had rotted from the inside. I remembered the way she looked at me in that office, arms crossed, head tilted, the weight of a $3. $8 million deal pressed up against my grief like a loaded gun. She'd made me choose. So I did. I pulled up my email app, composed a message with deliberate ease, and sent it from my personal address. One sentence. No emotion. I'm available for consulting, $400 an hour. 20-hour minimum. Payment in advance. I stared at the screen for a moment longer, then shut the laptop and went into the kitchen. Made a cup of coffee. Sat at the same table where Dad used to spread out the Sunday paper and debate whether the crosswords had gotten easier or he'd just gotten smarter. I sat in the silence of the house he paid off with a teacher's salary and a tutor's hustle, and I let the grief breathe. He deserved more than silence. He deserved more than a rushed funeral. He deserved more than the shrug of a CEO wife who weighed grief against quarterly projections. I'd see to it that he got more. Not through vengeance, but through clarity, through truth. Because when someone shows you exactly what they value and exactly what they think you're worth, your only job is to stop giving them discounts. And I was done being cheap. The church bell rang once, low and solemn, echoing across the small town like a sigh too heavy to carry alone. The sky was overcast fitting, I thought. The kind of gray that pressed against your skin like a reminder that something had ended, and the world wouldn't be kind enough to offer sunshine to soften it. People were already seated when I walked in. They didn't look away. They didn't glance down awkwardly or avoid eye contact the way the people at Ridge Tech did every time something felt too human. No, here in Mayfield, people met your eyes with quiet understanding. They nodded. They patted my back. Some whispered, he was a good man. And he was. Dad deserved a packed church. And that's exactly what he got. Old math students now grown with kids of their own. His barber. Neighbors. The woman from the post office he'd bring coffee to every Monday. The chess club crew, 4 of them with walkers and one with an oxygen tank sitting in the second row, dressed in suits a little too big, hands folded in reverent defiance of age and time. None of them had to be here. But they came. Because he mattered. Not a single person from the company came. No flowers. No card. Not even a bland, generic corporate statement. Rena didn't text. She didn't call. She didn't ask for the address. Maybe she thought grief was beneath her. Or maybe she realized showing her face would mean confronting what she'd said. What she'd chosen. A $3.8 million deal over the death of the man who once helped her father file bankruptcy paperwork after he lost everything. She never knew that. She never asked. She only knew value in digits, not in character. I stood behind the pulpit, heart dragging behind every breath. The wood was old, smooth at the edges. My fingers curled around it like it could hold me steady. I looked at the crowd and saw not just faces, but stories. Lives my father had touched in ways I'd never understood. He wasn't a man of grand gestures. He was quiet, deliberate. But the size of the room's grief told me he left an impact anyway. I'm Jared Whitlow. I began, my voice softer than I intended. Jasper Whitlow's son. A murmur of acknowledgement, respectful and warm. My dad wasn't flashy, I continued. He didn't chase power. He didn't care about titles or image. What he cared about, deeply, fiercely, was showing up. Every time. My throat tightened, but I pushed through. When my mother died, I was 7. I didn't understand loss. I just knew she wasn't coming back. And I remember Dad sitting on the floor with me one night, building a Lego castle. He said, "We build what we can, even when we lose a piece. The trick is learning to keep going anyway." I paused, took a breath. A tear finally rolled down my cheek. Not a sob, just quiet release. He taught me how to code before I could ride a bike. He stayed up with me when I got my first computer virus. He tutored kids on weekends, even when his back was bad. He made people feel seen. And that's not nothing. That's everything. People nodded. A woman in the 4th row wiped her eyes. One of his former students, Jason something, I remembered now, looked down, shoulders shaking. I ended with one sentence. He gave his life to people who never had to question if he cared. The silence afterward wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy, sacred. I stepped down from the pulpit and returned to my seat, hands trembling from the weight of saying it out loud. The service moved on. Hymns, prayers, a brief reading from one of his chess buddies, but I wasn't there anymore. My mind had drifted to the woman who wasn't in the room, the one who should have been beside me. Rena had always said she respected strength, that she admired people who didn't let emotion get in the way of action. But the truth was, she feared vulnerability. She didn't know what to do with real pain unless it fit inside a spreadsheet or a performance review. When I told her about Dad's cancer returning last year, she offered solutions, clinical trials, alternative treatments, scheduling efficiency. Not once did she say, "I'm sorry." And now, after everything, she couldn't even send a condolence email. After the service, people gathered in the parking lot, hugging, sharing stories. A woman I didn't recognize pressed a casserole dish into my hands. He helped my son pass algebra. Wouldn't take a dime. Said it was his job as a neighbor. I nodded. "Thank you." A man from the church grounds team leaned close. Every Christmas, he'd leave a gift card in my mailbox. Always anonymous, but we knew it was him. Another person added, he gave me his old snowblower when mine broke. Said he didn't need 2 lungs to shovel anyway. They all laughed at that. Because that was Dad. Undramatic. Generous. Selfless. Eventually, they left. The sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across the grass. I stayed behind and sat on the hood of my rental car, arms crossed, watching the light fade. That's when I pulled out my phone again. More voicemails. More texts. "Rena, let's talk." "Rena, I overreacted." "Rena, please just send the files." And then the kicker, her final message. "We're in trouble. The system's unstable. I need you." She didn't say sorry. She didn't ask how the funeral went. She didn't even mention my father. Just, "I need you." Because now her empire was wobbling. Now her golden deal was melting in her hands. I opened a new email. No greetings. No sympathy. "I'm available for consulting, $400 an hour. 20-hour minimum. Payment in advance." I hit send and watched the sun finally disappear. That was the last thing I gave her for free. The screen flickered to life at 9:02 a.m., and for a moment, I just sat there, watching the pixels stabilize into faces I knew too well. I was in Dad's kitchen, the ceramic mug in front of me still steaming, filled with the same coffee blend he used every morning, dark, unflinching, no sugar. Behind me, the cabinets were chipped from years of use, the wallpaper faded where sunlight hit it in long ribbons every afternoon. It was nothing like Ridgetecha's polished glass walls or the sterile conference room I used to sit in beside Rena. But this place had something that space never did: soul. 3 rectangles stared back at me through my laptop screen. Top left, Rena, hair tied back tight, black blouse, flawless makeup hiding a face etched with fatigue. Middle, Marcus, collar open, sweat on his forehead despite the AC hum I could hear in the background. Bottom, Blair Mendel, the company attorney, stone-faced as ever, eyes sharp behind her gold-rimmed glasses. Rena opened her mouth first, and for the first time in a long time, I heard something resembling caution in her voice. "Jared," she began soft. Almost too soft. "Thank you for agreeing to take this call." I didn't respond. I didn't nod. I just watched her. Let the silence answer for me. We know this has been a difficult time for you, she continued, and I almost laughed. The words sounded rehearsed, like she'd pulled them from a manual on how to manage volatile assets. And we acknowledged the timing was unfortunate. Unfortunate. That's what she called telling me to choose between work and burying my father. Not cruel, not disgraceful, just poor timing. Like a lunch meeting that ran long. Marcus cleared his throat. The Willcrest demo is tomorrow, he said, his voice tight. We've tried accessing RidgeNet's core modules, but the configuration files are missing. The shell's intact, but the functionality, well, it's non-existent. I offered, raising my eyebrows. His silence was confirmation. Jared, Blair cut in, her tone clipped and cold. We're prepared to take legal action if the material isn't restored immediately. Intellectual property developed during your employment belongs to RidgeTech under Clause. No, I interrupted, voice calm. Clause 9C specifies that any tools not formally submitted to the company's IP database are considered proprietary unless explicitly requested and documented. You'll find that RidgeNet was classified as transitional and never transferred per internal compliance policy. I'd be happy to forward that audit log. Blair blinked. Rena flinched. Marcus looked away. Let's not escalate this, Rena said quickly. We want to find a reasonable solution. I leaned forward, rested my elbows on the kitchen table, and let them sit in the weight of my silence before speaking. Then I guess you should have valued the architect before deciding he was disposable. Rena's lips tightened. I didn't say you were disposable. I said, you said I had to choose, I cut in. And I did. You just didn't like the choice. No one spoke. The system isn't recoverable without your assistance, Marcus admitted finally. We're willing to offer compensation for your time. A retainer. Consulting title. Stock options. Whatever's reasonable. There it was. The offer. The shift. The admission that what they needed wasn't in the hands of anyone left at RidgeTech. It was with me, quiet, grieving, no longer bound by obligation. I took a sip of coffee before responding. My terms, I said. $400 an hour. 20-hour minimum. Payment in advance. Additionally, I charge a knowledge transfer fee, flat rate, non-refundable. And any work I do will be strictly documented and limited to existing code stabilization. I won't build it again. Blair's jaw tensed. Rena looked like she wanted to argue, but it was Marcus who spoke next. Done, he said. Send the agreement. We'll wire the funds today. That told me everything I needed to know. They weren't negotiating from strength anymore. They were drowning, and I was the only person holding a rope. Oh, I added as I opened my calendar app, and I'm not available today. Rena's eyes widened. The demo's tomorrow. I'm aware, I said, without blinking. I can begin Thursday. You can use the time to prepare your legal paperwork and confirm your payment. Until then, we're done here. I clicked, end call. Just like that. I leaned back in Dad's chair, the cushion squeaking under me, and stared at the ceiling. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even satisfied. I just felt clean, like I had stripped away a layer of something I didn't need anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about correction, realignment. For years, I'd been their safety net, their silent weapon, the one they left out of the media kits and funding presentations while they smiled for investors and collected the applause. But now? Now I was the only one who could keep them afloat, and they knew it. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked at a squirrel. A boy rode past on a bike with no hands, mouth open in a wild laugh. The world kept moving. Mayfield hadn't changed, not in the ways that mattered. And in the stillness of that morning, I made peace with something else too. I wasn't going back. I would honor the contract. I would do the work. But RidgeTech? Rena? That life? It was already behind me. And for the first time, the future didn't look like a prison. It looked like a blank canvas. And I held the brush. Monday morning arrived dressed in silence. Not the silence of grief this time, but of distance, of choice. I was in Dad's recliner, the one with the loose spring on the left side and the upholstery that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old library books. My feet were propped up. A mug of coffee in one hand, my phone face down on the end table, buzzing every few minutes like a trapped fly. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. I already knew what those messages would say. The Willcrest demo was today, and without me, they were walking into a battlefield with no map and no bullets. RidgeNet was operational in appearance, but hollow underneath. Like a perfect cake made of air, no structure, no weight, no foundation. The moment Wilcrest tried to run a live test, the seams would split. I'd built RidgeNet's real functionality on layers that no one ever asked about. They never knew because they never cared to. So when I left, I didn't sabotage them. I simply took back what was mine and watched the illusion collapse on its own. At 9:12 a.m., the first major spike of calls started. 8 missed in 5 minutes. 2 from Rena. 1 from Marcus. The rest from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably Wilcrest engineers or panicking members of the Ridge Tech Ops team trying to find the magician behind the curtain. I muted them all. Took another sip of coffee. The world outside the window was still. Mayfield didn't care about a $3.8 million tech deal imploding. Birds chirped. A delivery truck rolled by. Life went on. By 9:30, the system logs I'd passively monitored on my private server showed error rates spiking. The shell Ridge Tech kept trying to run was fraying under retime strain. Memory overflow warnings. Dead calls to non-existent service bridges. UI panels stalling with data that had nowhere to go. Their engineers had no access to the containers I'd removed, no idea what the undocumented functions were even supposed to do. Because while they'd been focused on pitching the tech, I'd been the one keeping it alive. I flipped on the TV, not to watch the news, but for the background noise. I wasn't gloating. That wasn't the feeling. It was something quieter. Like watching someone trip after they insisted they knew the path. I'd warned them for years. Asked for support. Budget. A real team. Hell, I asked for credit. But they thought I'd never leave. Thought I was too loyal. Too dependent. They mistook quiet for compliance. They thought silence meant safety. The next wave of emails hit just after 10 a.m. The subject lines were a symphony of desperation. Urgent. Wilcrest access needed. Please respond immediately. System down. Critical help. We need you on the call now. I opened none of them. I didn't need to. Their urgency wasn't my emergency anymore. According to the terms we agreed on, consulting work required 24-hour scheduling notice, prepaid hours, and a knowledge transfer structure. They'd agreed in writing, and I was holding them to every word. Rena called again at 10:32. This time, I answered. Not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I knew the moment had come. Jared, she said quickly, her tone a mix of command and collapse. They're in the demo. It's not working. We've had 3 lockouts and 2 client-side exceptions. We need you on the call now. I'm not scheduled today, I said calmly. You don't understand, she snapped. Wilcrest is going to walk if we don't stabilize the back end. I do understand, I replied. Perfectly. That's why I asked for payment in advance and formal scheduling. She went quiet for a second. I could hear movement in the background, muffled voices, the rising tone of someone cursing. We'll double the rate for today. Just, please, Jared. This will bury us. No, I said, and the word felt clean in my mouth. It won't bury you. It'll just reveal what you built this house on. A hollow frame and the belief that I'd never leave. The silence on her end stretched out. And then, like a last-ditch effort, she asked, do you even care what happens to the company? You helped build this. No, I said again. I helped build the foundation. You ignored it. What's happening now? That's your reflection, not mine. I hung up before she could reply. The next few hours were quiet. Almost eerie. My phone stopped buzzing. The email flood slowed. Either they gave up trying to reach me or they'd moved on to damage control. Either way, I didn't care. I stretched out in the recliner, read an old paperback Dad kept by the fireplace, and finished my coffee without a single interruption. By late afternoon, I checked the business wire. Wilcrest had officially postponed their integration decision indefinitely. A spokesperson cited unexpected back-end instability. That was PR speak for. It crashed, and no one knew why. Investors were already pulling back. Ridge Tech's board issued a vague statement about internal restructuring and process reevaluation. It had taken less than a day for them to begin unraveling. All because they bet on a system they never understood and a man they assumed would always bend. I didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. I just closed my laptop and stood up. The sun was starting to set through the living room window, painting the hardwood floor with gold. I stood in that light and thought about Dad. About the kind of man he raised. About how much it would have hurt him to see the way Rena treated my grief, and how proud he would have been to see me walk away anyway. They thought they could replace me. They thought they could fake the foundation. But I was the foundation. And now? Now they were standing in the ruins of everything they took for granted. Tuesday morning, I woke up to the kind of stillness that lets you know the storm has shifted, but not passed. It wasn't the anxious kind, though. Not like the hum of Ridgetech's hallways, where people pretended not to panic while emails burned holes in their inboxes. This silence came with peace, with finality, with knowing. I brewed my coffee slowly, let the aroma fill the corners of Dad's kitchen, and took my first sip with the window open. The leaves rustled outside, birds chirped softly, and for a moment, it felt like I had all the time in the world. Because I did. Time no longer belonged to anyone else. Not Rena. Not the company. Not the deal. It was mine again. At 9:18 a.m., my phone buzzed. I flipped it over expecting another missed call or an angry follow-up from legal. But this one was different. A scheduled conference call. Subject line, proposal, executive restructure. Sent from Blair's office. Requested by the board. That word sat there like a dare. Restructure. I clicked accept, more out of curiosity than anything else. What else could they possibly want now? The call began with polished faces and stiff posture. This time, the full board was present. 9 of them, all dressed like the sky was falling, which, professionally, maybe it was. Rena was there too, lower corner of the screen, her usual confidence fractured around the edges. She didn't speak first. That was telling. Instead, board chair Elias Worthington, a man who used to forget my name in elevators, cleared his throat and leaned in. Jared, he said, thank you for joining. We're aware of the events over the last week, and we've reviewed the situation from all angles. All angles. Translation: we're bleeding, and no one knows how to stitch the wound. We understand your contributions to RidgeNet were foundational, he continued, glancing off-screen for a second like he needed reassurance. And we now recognize that leadership did not properly assess or support your role in the Wilcrest project. There it was. The polite version of, we messed up. We'd like to offer you a new position, Elias said, folding his hands like a prayer. Chief Technology Officer. Full executive access. 60% salary increase. Immediate elevation to our strategy board. And, if accepted today, full stock reallocation equal to that of a founding partner. That last part made me blink. Founding partner. They were desperate. I could smell it through the screen. I looked down at the wood grain of Dad's kitchen table, then back up at them. They stared, waiting for my voice like it was a lifeline. Even Marcus was quiet now. JC wasn't on the call, likely gone or too ashamed to face me. Rena still hadn't said a word. Her eyes were trained on the lower left of her screen, jaw tight, lips pressed like she wanted to speak, but knew better. That silence was louder than any of their offers. Why now? I asked, my tone calm, detached. We need leadership that understands the core of our technology, Elias answered. You had that, I replied. You had me in-house for 7 years. Rena's head lifted just slightly. She looked right at me then, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of holding her gaze. I turned back to Elias. You said I could choose between work and my family. I did. Why are you surprised at the results? There was a long pause. Then Rena finally spoke. Her voice didn't tremble. It never did. But it wasn't cold either. She was trying for something softer, something close to sincere. Jared, I was wrong. About a lot of things. You deserved time. Your father deserved time. I see that now. I let the silence hold for a beat before I responded. You don't get to apologize with offers. You don't get to fix something you broke by handing me a bigger title in the ruins. It's not like that, she said. It is exactly like that, I said, sharper now. When I asked for 4 days, you gave me an ultimatum. When I gave you silence, you gave me panic. Now that you've watched it fall apart, you offer a throne built from ashes. But I'm not interested in being king of what I've already walked away from. Marcus muttered something under his breath, but no one followed up. The room on their side of the screen looked tense, desperate, trapped. And I sat calmly with a warm mug in my hand, sunlight across my cheek. Blair cleared her throat. Then what is your ask, Jared? Are you refusing completely, or is there a path to reconciliation? No ask, I said. There is no reconciliation. Another silence. Elias looked tired. Not surprised. Just tired. We understand, he said finally. Would you consider, at the very least, releasing the remainder of your documentation to assist our recovery process? I tilted my head slightly. This was the moment. The last page. What I built, I said slowly, was built in my own time, with my own resources. with no company support. I submitted what the contracts required. Nothing more. But the knowledge exists only in your head, Blair pressed. And without it, you have what you paid for. I cut in. The rest? Never belonged to you. You're punishing the company, Marcus blurted out. This isn't about Rena anymore. It's about holding a grudge. I smiled, just enough to make him pause. You want to talk about punishment? My father died. I was told by my own wife to choose between grieving him or showing up for a board meeting. I walked out of that office with a hole in my chest and silence in return. That wasn't punishment, Marcus. That was clarity. I leaned back, let the weight of my words settle. I'm not punishing you, I finished. I'm just done carrying the weight of people who only value what they can exploit. Elias nodded slowly. Thank you for your time, Jarrett. He ended the call before anyone else could speak. The screen went black. The silence returned. I closed the laptop and stared out the kitchen window for a long time. There were no second thoughts. No anger. No sadness. Just resolve. They had offered the very thing I once dreamed about. Power, recognition, equity. But it came covered in the soot of disrespect, and I had already learned what it meant to lose someone who mattered. I wasn't going to waste another second on those who didn't. The only thing left to do was live. Not survive. Not prove. Just live. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking to town. I visited the diner, the library, the hardware store that had reopened under a new owner. Everyone asked about Dad. Everyone told stories. They didn't care about Ridgetech or stock options. They remembered the man who shoveled their driveways and tutored their kids and donated anonymously to the local scholarship fund. His name meant something here, and that reminded me, so did mine. That evening, as the sun fell behind the tree line, I carved a small wooden plaque from a piece of pine I found in the garage. I sanded the edges smooth, etched his initials with an old soldering tool, and placed it on the mantel above the fireplace. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. Just like him, and just like me. 2 weeks passed like smoke, visible, drifting, but hard to hold. I didn't return to Ridgetech. I didn't need to. The story had already written itself. What I'd set in motion wasn't revenge. It was the full consequence of being unheard for too long. It was what happens when you ignore the scaffolding of your success and then try to scale higher. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't leaked anything. I hadn't burned a single bridge. All I did was step back and let gravity do the rest. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got the call from Cameron. His name lit up my phone with a familiarity that made me hesitate for a second before answering. Cameron worked in finance, one of the few genuinely decent guys at Ridgetech. He had a good head on his shoulders, stayed out of boardroom politics, and treated everyone with a level of basic dignity that felt increasingly rare. If anyone could speak the truth without spinning it into strategy, it was him. Jared, he said the moment I answered. Hey, I know you're probably sick of hearing from anyone on this side, but I just wanted to reach out, off the record. His voice sounded rough, not rehearsed, not filtered through legal. I figured something was up, I said. What's going on? He sighed. Wilcrest pulled out. Officially, they cited instability, but the subtext is clear. They don't trust Ridgetech as architecture anymore. The demo disaster was one thing, but when we couldn't provide real documentation or answers in the postmortem, that sealed it. I leaned back in Dad's recliner, the fabric creaking beneath me like it was listening too. So they walked. They did more than walk, Cameron said. They sent a letter to our remaining enterprise partners. Quiet, but effective. By Friday, 3 other clients had paused their contracts. That stopped me for a moment. 3. Yeah, he said. Halberd Solutions, Lencio, and Orvid Systems. That's a huge chunk of our upcoming pipeline. Between Wilcrest and those 3, we've lost over $7.4 million in projected revenue for Q3. I exhaled slowly, not triumphantly, just processing. The numbers didn't surprise me. RidgeNet wasn't just the system. It was the illusion of stability. Without the spine I'd built, all they had was surface. Cameron continued. The board held an emergency session Friday. Rena's out. My brows lifted. Out? As in, removed as CEO, he said. Unanimous vote. They tried to get ahead of it, but the investors didn't give them room. She still holds stock, but her authority's gone. And Marcus resigned yesterday morning, he said. Rumor is he was given the option, resign quietly or face internal review. He took the first exit. I wasn't surprised. Marcus was always the type to jump ship when it stopped sailing smoothly. He rode the momentum of other people's work, but the second the engine sputtered, he was already scouting the next opportunity. JC? I asked. Fired, Cameron said flatly. They needed someone to blame on the tech side. But honestly, she didn't even know how far behind she was. You were the only one keeping things afloat. Once you left, it exposed all the blind spots. I nodded, feeling more tired than vindicated. So what now? They've brought in outside consultants, he said, trying to reverse engineer RidgeNet. But from what I've heard, they're nowhere close. Too many gaps. Too many dependencies they don't understand. It's like trying to recreate a painting with only the shadows left on the wall. I pictured it. The office full of people who once dismissed me as the quiet one, now frantically tearing apart code they never tried to learn. The same conference rooms that once left me out of credit conversations now echoing with confused meetings and desperate brainstorming. I should have felt smug, but I didn't. I just felt finished, like I'd already left a place in my soul long before I walked out physically. You made your point, Cameron said after a pause. Even if most people don't say it out loud, they know. You were the engine. They tried to ride on your silence. Now they're just choking on it. I almost smiled at that. You planning on coming back? He asked carefully. No, I said. There's nothing left for me there. Not even bitterness. He was quiet for a moment, then said, well, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For how they treated you. For how we all got used to you just being there. I appreciate that, I said, and meant it. We hung up not long after, and I sat with the weight of it all. Not the fall of RidgeTech, but the rise of something else. My own understanding. My own refusal to be treated like a ghost in my own legacy. I didn't need an apology from the board. I didn't need press. I didn't need them to say I was right. Their collapse said it for me. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through Dad's workshop. His tools were still hung neatly on pegboards, labeled in his meticulous handwriting. It wasn't just a garage. It was a museum of doing things the right way. Simple, precise, purposeful. I found old radio parts, his soldering kit, even the wooden prototypes of chess pieces he once carved during winter. He always said the Bishop was his favorite because it moved diagonally, unexpected, strategic, quiet. That night, I sat at the workbench and sanded down a block of pine. I didn't know what I was making yet. I just wanted to create something. Not for profit. Not for performance. Just to feel what under my hands again. To be present in a process with no metrics. The next morning, I received an email from a tech journalist I used to know casually. The subject line read, "Would you like to comment on RidgeTech's collapse?" I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without opening. Let them write what they wanted. Let people guess. I didn't need to shape the narrative. The truth would do just fine on its own. By the end of the second week, my name had vanished from RidgeTech's site. No mention of me under founding engineers. No credit on RidgeNet. It was as if I'd been quietly erased. But I didn't mind. Let them pretend. Let them rewrite history. I had my piece. And they had their fallout. Some lessons come with bruises. This one came with receipts. Receipts in the form of missed revenue, investor distrust, and public embarrassment. I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it on LinkedIn. I didn't even update my resume. Because the story they tried to own had always been mine. And now everyone knew it. Even if they didn't want to say it out loud. A month passed. Not in a blur. Those days were over. It passed like a sunrise that refused to be rushed, slow and steady, lighting new parts of me I didn't realize were still buried in shadow. After everything with RidgeTech, after the silence, the rejection, the unraveling, I let the dust settle without stirring it again. I didn't check the business headlines. I didn't track the stock. I didn't reread the messages that had filled my inbox in the days after the collapse. I left it all behind like old skin. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel naked without the title, without the tension. I felt free. I spent my days in Dad's house, waking up to birdsong and the smell of old wood and familiarity. I fixed things, not systems, not code, but actual things. A leaky faucet in the kitchen, the loose panel in the stairwell. I replaced the dead bulbs in the porch light and cleaned out the gutters. There was something sacred in the mundane, something honest. I stopped being a problem to be solved and remembered what it meant to simply be. It was during one of those mornings, standing in the backyard raking up fallen branches, that I got the email. The subject line was short. Interested in talking? It was from Morgan Levine, founder of a growing software firm I'd admired from afar for years. Small company, Tight team, big vision. They didn't just build tech, they built culture. I'd followed their work quietly for years, often reading their blog posts and watching the way they treated people like minds, not machines. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit for a day. Then two. I wanted to be sure I wasn't saying yes because I needed a new ladder to climb. I wanted something different this time. Something real. Something where showing up as a human being didn't cost you your dignity. On the third day, I replied, available to chat later this week. Friday afternoon work for you. Morgan responded within the hour. Warm. Direct. No fluff. The kind of email that didn't feel like it had been copy-pasted by a recruiting assistant. Friday arrived, and I took the call from Dad's kitchen table, wearing an old flannel shirt and the kind of calm I hadn't known I was capable of. We didn't talk about Ridge Tech. Not really. Morgan had heard the rumors, of course. The mysterious collapse. The quiet architect. But they didn't press. They asked better questions. What's something you built that you're proud of but no one ever noticed? What does a good day look like for you? Not productive. Good. If you didn't need to prove anything anymore, what would you create? For the first time in a long time, I felt seen without being evaluated. At the end of the conversation, Morgan asked, how long would you need before starting, if we made you an offer? There was no pressure in the question. No assumption. Just respect. I smiled and replied, 2 weeks. Morgan paused, then said, take 4. Family comes first. That was it. That was the moment I knew I was home, not because of the salary or the title or the platform, but because someone recognized that I was a person, not a profit center. I accepted the role a few days later. Senior Systems Strategist. Not CTO, not lead architect, just strategist. It sounded simple, but it was exactly what I needed. A place to build without the weight of needing to save anyone. A seat at the table without being told to earn it over and over again. On my first day, I didn't wear a suit. I didn't brace for politics. I showed up to a welcome email that included a Spotify playlist, a note from the design team saying, we're glad you're here, and a digital gift card for coffee. No HR lecture. No expectation to pretend. I set up my home workspace slowly, deliberately. Not in some glass building overlooking the skyline, but right here, in the house my father built a life inside. I cleared a corner of his old office and repurposed the shelves. I left his books in place, though. They belonged there. Their presence reminded me I didn't get here alone. And right there on my new desk, I placed the pendant Dad had carved. It wasn't much. Just a small piece of polished pine shaped like a bishop chess piece. He said it was his favorite because it moved quietly but changed the game if you used it right. It had been on his keyring until the day he passed. Now it sat in front of me, a small monument to everything he taught me. That pendant kept me grounded in the weeks that followed. Every time I looked at it, I remembered who I was before the titles, before the demos, before the $3. $8 million deal that fell apart because someone thought grief was a distraction. My new team didn't ask for miracles. They asked for perspective. They didn't expect me to be a hero. They expected me to collaborate. And when I told them I was blocking off a few days next month to visit my father's grave, no one flinched. In fact, Morgan responded to my calendar note with a single message, take the time. And thanks for modeling what matters. That, more than any offer letter or compensation package, told me I'd landed in the right place. I didn't tell anyone at Ridge Tech where I'd gone. I didn't need to. The story had already traveled farther than I ever could have pushed it. I saw the LinkedIn posts, some cryptic, some regretful, none with names. I saw the headlines in niche publications, the quiet collapse of Ridge Tech, why culture still beats code, the fall of an empire built on ego. I read none of them fully. I didn't need to relive it. I'd survived it. That was enough. Occasionally, I still got emails from people inside Ridge Tech. Some asking questions, others offering backhanded admiration. A few apologized. I replied to 1 or 2, the ones that came from the heart. The rest I let drift unanswered. My peace was too precious to spend explaining the cost of betrayal to people who had already learned it the hard way. Instead, I poured myself into building again. This time differently. This time with joy. I worked with engineers who asked thoughtful questions and weren't afraid to say, I don't know. I met with product leads who actually listened instead of waiting for their turn to talk. I joined code reviews that were more like conversations than critiques. And each time I deployed a new solution, or solved an integration issue, or helped a junior dev make a breakthrough, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not the puff chest kind. The quiet kind. The kind that lives in doing something well and being appreciated for it. One night, as rain tapped against the window and my screen glowed with finished work, I reached for the pendant, rolled it between my fingers, and I thought about the man who sat through my tantrums, taught me patience, and told me the world wouldn't always clap when I did the right thing. But I'd know. And I did. Because I hadn't just left Ridge Tech. I had walked back into myself. And this time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to notice.